morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Michaela Vrazdova Romesser, and I'm a senior associate at Scott Legal PC. Today, we are going to spend some time and we'll talk about the EB-5 investment green card. A few things I wanted to mention before we get started. So Scott Legal PC is a full-service immigration law firm, and we assist individuals pursuing various types of visas and green cards. We can assist with family-based, employment-based, and investment-based visas and green cards. And we regularly process a high number of EB-5 investment green cards. We'll continue to have this webinar series, and we will do at least 2 webinars a month on different visa topics. At the end of this webinar, we'll send you out a few things. So we'll send you this PowerPoint we'll be using today during the presentation. We'll also send you our EB-5 visa guide, which is a comprehensive visa guide on the EB-5 investment green card topic. And we'll also send you a link where you can sign up for additional webinars we'll have in the future, and also a link where this webinar will be recorded. Finally, our webinar will be available on our YouTube channel, and we encourage you to subscribe and hit the notification button on our YouTube channel, as we often post new immigration videos. We'll also send you a link where you can set up a consultation with one of our attorneys in case you would like to discuss your case in more detail. So regarding our speakers today, we are lucky to have our founder, Ian Scott, who has a vast experience with processing EB-5 green cards. And as I mentioned, my name is Michaela Vrazdova Romesser, and I'll be a moderator of today's webinar. If you have any questions while we go through the presentation, please feel free to put it in the chat box or in the Q&A box, and we'll get to all questions at the end. Perfect. So why don't we get started?
Perfect. Oh, great. Thank you very much, Michaela. Good to be here. And yeah, before we jump into the details of the EB-5 program, I just wanted to describe kind of the 2 types of the EB-5 programs that really exist, because they are similar but somewhat separate and distinct. So the first is a regional center, and the second is direct investment. So the regional center is a situation where you have a company or a group that wants to raise a bunch of capital. So let's say the Hilton hotel chain wants to build a big hotel in some place, and they want to raise $100 million to be able to do that. Then they will file paperwork with the government to start a regional center, and then they would solicit investments from people that were interested in green cards, so $800,000 a person. And then they would utilize that program to create jobs, the jobs that are required for the EB-5 program. And this is it's a very passive form of investment, because the individual is investing in someone else's project. They don't really have to do anything in terms of creating the jobs. There are a few benefits with respect to the jobs, because they are allowed to count indirect jobs. The other kind of thing about regional centers is there are really quite high administrative fees associated with regional centers. So it could be anywhere from $35,000 to $50,000 in fees, and they usually have low return. And when you take into account the administration fees, the return actually could be negative, or often is negative. And usually the people who invest in a regional center, they're not doing it because of any return, because as I said, that's usually negative. They just want the green card. And then to contrast with the other EB-5 program is direct investment. And this is someone who really wants control over their own business. They want control to hire. They want control over returns. And it is their own business. So they may have entered the United States on an E2, invested in a business, and then invest more so that they can meet the EB-5 requirements. So the other thing with this program is the direct program is that all of the jobs must be direct jobs, so people who actually work for the entity. And these programs are, as I said, they're somewhat separate and distinct. And the regional center program does require reauthorization periodically from the government, whereas the direct investment, it's already embedded in statute, and there's no reauthorization that's required. But really, the direct investment is going to be for someone who wants control over their own process, control over the profits, control over everything related to the EB-5, whereas the regional center is going to be for someone who's a little bit more passive. So in terms of the EB-5 requirements, and these are the same really for both the regional centers and the direct investment, but there are some nuances with respect to the two different types of programs. So there are two different investment amounts. So investment is going to be kind of one of the key, there are a couple of key things related to EB-5, and one is going to be investment. So you're either going to invest 800,000 or 1,050,000 in what's called a new commercial enterprise. And a new commercial enterprise doesn't have to be a new business, but it's going to be a business that was formed after 1990. So how you determine whether you invest 800,000 or 1,050,000 is going to be based on whether the enterprise is in what's called a targeted employment area. So a targeted employment area is either an area where the unemployment rate is 1.5 times the national average, or a rural area, so defined by the population in a particular place. So if it's in one of those two places, then you're going to be able to invest 800,000. And if it's not in one of those two places, then you're going to be investing 1,050,000. And the money that you invest, you do have to kind of track it very carefully, because you have to make sure that you're investing money that can be included, investing and spending money that can be included. So for example, you can't include money that's spent on your lawyers for filing the application, or you can't include money that is related to any type of administration fee. So if you're in a regional center, you can't include the money, you can't take 800,000 and pay the 30 or 40, $50,000 from the 800,000 to cover the administration fees or accounting fees or anything like that. You do have to invest the full 800,000. The investment can be made over time, but you do have to have made the investment before you actually apply for the EB-5. So in some cases, we have done EB-5 for someone who has had an E2, for example, and maybe made investments over several years, and then we can keep on adding up those investment amounts until we actually come to the 800,000 or 1,050,000 that's required. And keep in mind as well that investment is actually investment in the sense that it's money that the person getting the EB-5 has, possession and control of the funds and has invested it in the business. So that's different from retained earnings, because you could have a situation where someone's in the US on an E2 and they invest, say, 100,000, but then the company makes $2 million and there's $1 million in retained earnings. And then the next year they spend that money, but none of that is included as investment, because that's just money that the company's earned, and the investment has to be money that was earned or controlled by the individual that's applying for EB-5. The one kind of big thing with EB-5 is that and this is a big difference for me too as well, is one is that EB-5 is not country specific, right? So anyone can apply for a green card, whereas E2 is going to be specific to people from certain countries. And the reason I bring up E2 a lot is because E2 is an investor visa. So EB-5 might be the big brother or big sister of an E2, and it is an investor visa as well. So but the source of funds analysis for EB-5 is quite extensive. Usually for E2, we tend to gloss over source of funds. Usually consulates have a page limit. So we would tend to include only a few pages on source of funds for most consulates. Whereas for EB-5, really the source of funds analysis is much more like an audit. So the analysis and assessment is quite extensive, and usually, often clients are a bit surprised at how extensive that analysis actually is. The investment must be equity, so you can't kind of set up anything like a loan and do that. That would work. So we just talked a lot about the investment. So that's kind of the one big thing with respect to EB-5. Now, the second big thing with respect to EB-5 is creating US jobs. So you are required to create 10 full-time jobs. So not part-time jobs, full-time jobs. And as I mentioned, the direct program, the jobs do have to be direct in that the people have to be working for the entity. The indirect, if you're a regional center, then they can say, okay, well, there's a new hotel going in here. So that hotel is going to require catering. It's going to be requiring laundry. It's going to require all these other things that an economist might be able to come in and say, okay, well, indirectly there are X, Y, Z jobs that are created, and those can be added. So it's very helpful for coming up to the 10 jobs, especially when you need to create 10 jobs for multiple people. So because if there are 100 people that invest in a project, then you would have to create 1,000 jobs, right? So it's the indirect jobs can be quite important. For direct investment, it's only one investor per project for entity. So if you have an entity that is, let's say, a restaurant or something like that, then you can only get one EB-5 investment out of that. You can't have pooled investment and like, you know, 5 people investing and each of them getting a green card, even if you created 50 jobs, right? So it's something that changed in March of 2022. They used to permit pooled investing, but they don't allow that anymore. If you're doing a direct investment, and even if you're doing even the regional center is going to have a business plan, but if you're doing direct investment, the business plan is going to be very important. And your investment does have to actually be linked to job creation. So that's going to be something that's very important as well. And you're going to be documenting the full-time workers. And keep in mind, these workers, 10 full-time jobs, and the workers have to be US citizens or green card holders, right? So it's very important to perhaps register for E-Verify so that you are sure that when you're hiring somebody, because we have had situations where someone has given an employer, you know, false information, false green card, false information, and that's obviously going to be a problem if that happens. EB-5 filing, in terms of what the petitions that have to be filed, the first petition that has to be filed is an I-526 petition. If someone is in the United States, they can also, as long as their category is current, they can concurrently file an I-485 petition. And when you file an I-485 petition, you have a lot of benefit because you have the benefit of applying for work authorization and travel authorization. And if you're outside the United States, you have to wait till the I-526 has been approved, and then you would be able to start consular processing outside the United States. Then once you have the green card, 2 years after you have the green card, you are going to be able to start the removal of conditions process, and that is filing an I-829, which is just another, really just proving that you actually were able to create the US jobs. So the key changes to the program, what had happened is there was a big change in March of 2022 to the program, and this change was for the better. Unfortunately, it took a long time for the changes to come about, and there really changes to the regional center program because the other program didn't require reauthorization. So the program had paused for quite some time, almost a year and a half. And it was quite chaotic and confusing. But now the program has been reauthorized till 2027, and the regulations have made it clear that as long as a petition is filed before September 30th, 2026, then they're going to adjudicate it, because that was a big problem. When they paused the program before, they just stopped adjudicating petitions because they weren't sure if they were permitted to. Big changes were that they increased the investment amounts from 500 to 800,000, and then from 1 million to 1,050,000. So the upper end really didn't increase that much. It only increased $50,000. And they also changed the TA rules, the targeted employment area rules, so that the government is the one that has to do that, to administer that. Whereas before it was a calculation that the individuals could do and you could link census tracts and different things together, but that's no longer permitted. And then another important change is there were carve-outs set aside for rural areas, high unemployment, and infrastructure projects. And the reason these became really important is because the carve-outs created openings for people from countries where the country was backlogged, for example, India and China, where if they invest in a high unemployment area, rural or infrastructure area, they can actually jump to the front of the line with respect to their processing. And this becomes particularly important because EB-5 petitions are taking up to 5 years to be processed. But if you invest in a rural area, it could be 6 months that it's processed, because part of the March legislation also said that rural areas should be prioritized. But also, if you invest in one of these carve-out areas, then let's say you were from China, there would be other people who their visa category isn't even current, right? So if they were in the United States, they wouldn't be able to file the adjustment status or I-485 petition. But someone who's in the United States and filed as a Chinese national under one of these categories, rural area, high unemployment, or infrastructure, would actually be able to file the the I-485 petition. So this was a very significant change in the legislation. The other change, well, we talked about this, well, this was a change. I didn't talk about it as a change, but in the past, before March of 2022, you weren't actually able to file the I-485 petition concurrently, which was a big problem, especially given how long the petitions were taking to be approved. And they also clarified that administrative fees can't be used, and we talked about that earlier. And loans and gifts are fine. The issue here was when they were changing the legislation, they did want to modify the gifts and say that the gifts could only come from relatives and immediate relatives and things like that, but they ended up leaving it as it was. So as long as you have a gift letter and you pay the gift taxes, et cetera, then that's fine. And loans have always been fine. Unsecured loan is fine. Secured loan is fine against your personal property. Although if you do secure against your personal property, then you will have to show where you obtained the money to get the security. And if you get a gift from someone, then the source of funds analysis doesn't disappear, then you have to show where they got the money from. And then the other change is that they have given ability to change regional centers if there's a failure. And this is something that's going to be important because sometimes the regional center might fail through no fault of the actual investors. Other considerations for EB-5, the EB-5, if you're doing direct investment in particular, you can't just kind of put money in a bank account and say, okay, I want to apply for EB-5. You do have to show commitments and or investment in different things. We talked about loans and gifts, but the other thing to mention with loans and gifts is that if you do have a loan, and let's say you say, okay, I'm going to have a loan and I'm paying it over 5 years or 10 years, the petition is going to take 5 years to be approved. So they may ask in 5 years, show me that you've made the loan payments, right? Same thing with the gifts. They may say, show me that you've paid the gift tax, right? So that's something to consider. When you're buying a business under EB-5, often the amount that you spent to buy the business, if the money is going to the seller, it's not going to qualify for EB-5 because the money has to be money that is used for job creation. If the money goes to the seller, that money is not used for job creation. And there's no ownership amount for EB-5. E2 requires 50% for an investor visa. You can own a fraction of a percent for EB-5 as long as it's not debt. And then guarantees, you can't have any guarantees or return on investment, guaranteed return on investment. That's something you always have to be careful of when you and you have to look at the provisions. Like if there's an operating agreement and an operating agreement says, or shareholder agreement says that you're able to redeem your shares, then that's going to be problematic for EB-5. The moving from E2 visa to EB-5, we talked about some things in E2, like if you're purchasing a business, that's no problem, or if you're spending money on legal fees, that's no problem, but those things can't count for EB-5. And there's that link to job creation for EB-5 that's going to be really, really necessary to follow. Okay, so let's look at an example here of an EB-5 example. So this person, Helen, she obtained an E2 in 2015, and then she purchased a business for $300,000. And the business had 5 full-time employees at the time, and she paid the lawyer $40,000 in legal fees. So at the end of 2019, she took another $500,000 that was given to her as a gift, and the person who gave the gift got it from an inheritance from someone who died a while ago. But instead of giving Helen the money directly, the person put the money directly into Helen's business bank account. And so when the money was invested, because keep in mind that's 4 years later, then now she had 10 full-time employees. So she has another 5 employees from the 5 that she started with when she bought the company. And then at the end of 2019, so keep in mind, in the beginning of 2019, she took $500,000 gift. In the end of 2019, she paid herself a bonus of $100,000 after the company made $1 million, right? So we'll talk about that, so whether it's revenue or net income, the company made $1 million. And then on the 20th, she applied for EB-5 saying, hey, look, I've invested $1.8 million, the $300,000 for the business I purchased, the $500,000 for the gift, and $1 million that I have in retained earnings. She also included information that she's already hired the 10 full-time jobs, so she's already met that requirement. She can hire 3 or 4 more people, but she doesn't really want to. She's not, and she's located in an area where the unemployment rate is 7%. So let's look at this example a little bit. So a few things. So the 300,000 that Helen used to purchase the business, that money went to the seller. So that none of that can be counted for EB-5, right? So that's the first thing. And then also any money she paid in legal fees cannot be counted for EB-5. The 500,000, the government doesn't care that the person got the money from someone who passed away and may be very difficult to get records. In order for that $500,000 to count, they would have to produce source of funds information, extensive source of funds information with respect to how the person who passed away obtained that money, right? You'd have to have a trail of like tracing of that funds through from inception to right through to going into the account, to Helen's account. The other huge issue here is that the person deposited the money directly into Helen's business bank account, and that's a big problem, right? So Helen has to have possession and control of the funds for the $500,000 to count. USCIS used to deny applications because students would be, say, investing in a regional center, and their parents would be giving them the money. And the parents, because the parents didn't want the money to land in the bank account of the student for even a second, they deposited the money directly into the regional center, and the USCIS denied those petitions, saying that the investor never had possession and control of the funds. So you definitely need the money to go from the investor to its person. The person's giving the gift to the investor, and then the investor invests the money in the business. But let's say that Helen actually invested the $500,000 herself in the business, and she has 10 full-time employees, and she paid herself a bonus of $100,000. Now you have to be very careful on any money that you're counting towards investment when you're paying the investor. So because if the company didn't make any money, or let's say that the company made revenue of $1 million but had a profit of 90,000, then that means that the payment of at least 10,000 of the bonus that went to Helen came from the 500,000. That would disqualify the case right away, right? So none of the money that was invested can go back to the investor for obvious reasons, right? Obvious to me anyway. But the next thing on here is that January 1st, she applied, and she says, well, okay, we already said 300,000 doesn't count. 500,000 probably doesn't count, but even if we said that 500,000 counts. And then she says that $1 million, because she has $1 million in retained earnings. And so she's, and the retained earnings, as we said, doesn't count towards the investment at all either. And probably none of her employees count, because the 5 that were there before, those certainly don't count because they were there already. And then the 5 that she hired since then, they maybe count if the $500,000 that she invested, because the job creation has to be linked to the investment. So they would only count if the $500,000 counted in terms of the investment amount. It looks like in this case it wouldn't, because of the Helen, the way that the gift was transferred to her, or transferred directly to her bank account. So she would have to, still invest the funds and hire the 10 full-time employees. And one thing is it looks like she isn't in a targeted employment area though, because the unemployment rate is 7%, and the current unemployment rate is around 3.5%. So 1.5 times that is not 7. So that would put her in a TEA. So that's something to consider. So she would be looking at investing the 800,000. And when you're looking at the investment, if you're investing over different periods of time, the person has to be in a TEA every single time that the investment has been made. So other considerations, the EB-5 program, it takes a long time, unfortunately. It takes 5 years sometimes to get the petition approved, the I-526 petition approved. So you really have to make sure that you have some type of underlying status, or that you file the I-485 if you're able to, or that you're prepared to stay out of the US during that time. So that's something to keep in mind. Travel considerations are, you have to just make sure that if you apply for the I-485 that you have applied for advanced parole, so that you're able to come back and forth, and keeping an eye on your visa expiration dates. and making sure that the visa that you have, especially if you're filing an I-485, is a dual intent visa, or that you're kind of monitoring when it is that you can come and go. And a lot of people we see, like, have parallel green card strategies. They might start with the EB-5, and then they might marry a US citizen. And often we'll just say, forget about the EB-5, just use the US citizen as the mechanism to get the green card, because you're going to get it a lot faster. And there are benefits when you marry a US citizen, like where you get citizenship within 3 years rather than 5. And the process of removing conditions on the green card is going to be quite extensive. So, but planning really is the key for all of this. Perfect. And yeah, I see that it doesn't look like we have any questions. Any questions in the from the audience. We'll see if there are any that come in the next 30 seconds or so. But yeah, we appreciate you joining us today, and definitely we as Michaela said, we'll be sending you the presentation, the video. We'll be sending you guides. We'll be sending you mechanism to set up a consultation. And definitely, if you have follow-up questions, a consultation is the best way to do that.
Thank you, Ian, and thank you
Perfect.
everyone for joining us.
Thanks, Michaela. Thank you, everyone. Okay, take care. Bye.
Bye.